Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Future of XYZ. I'm very excited to have a good friend and absolutely amazing woman on the program today, Nancy Giordano. Thanks for joining us on Future of XYZ.
I'm so excited. We made it happen. Yay.
We made it happen. Nancy, you call yourself and others call you an exponential strategist. You are recognized globally as one of the world's top female futurists, which is where you and I originally connected on the futurism topic. You founded 14 years ago Play Big Inc., which we'll have a chance to talk about, but helping visionary leaders play bigger. You founded 4 years ago Femme Futurist Society, which I'm sure will get woven into this conversation. You wrote a best-selling book called Leadering, the way visionary leaders play bigger, so tying into the work that you do at Play Big. And mostly you've given over 200 keynotes now globally, I mean, which is pretty amazing, and consulted on a portfolio of, billions of dollars of pretty much all the brands that we all know and use on a regular basis in the business world and in the consumer world. You have a pretty great life. And so it seems only appropriate for the work that you do as a futurist and as the work that you do as a human being living your life that we're going to talk about the future of hope. Which
can I just add to that resume that I also have amazing young adult children now that have been woven into all this work and things that I get to go do too. So I think that's an important part when we look at our resumes of our lives, with all the places that we put time and energy.
Absolutely. And especially when they're amazing young adults who, help you see the future.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
I'm going to start as we always start every episode of Future of XYZ with a definitional question. So in the context of your expertise in today's conversation, let's define, hope.
The way I think about it is really our outlook on life, right? What is it that we believe is possible? And a few years ago, I changed my title. I gave myself a promotion from strategic futurist to exponential strategist, really focused on exponential hope, because I feel like that is the thing that moves us forward, right? This idea that the future is something way, way out there. The reality is every single decision we make right now has exponential impact. And if we orient it from a place of fear and a place of scarcity and a place of all these awful things, right, we end up creating that as our reality versus if we really do think about this from a place of hopefulness and shared prosperity and optimism and what this moment of such breakthrough inflection offers us, then I think that we are orienting in a much more powerful place.
It's interesting because I mean, we talk about this anytime we get on the phone, and I struggle with the optimism sometimes. I've often called myself an optimistic nihilist, and, it swings wildly between the optimistic part and the nihilistic part. And in 2025, March 2025, we find ourselves living in a world that I feel is socioeconomically, geopolitically, socioculturally, just in total, as you just used the word inflection, but it feels like chaos, to be honest. And I'm not sure that anyone really has any understanding or grasp on what's coming next. And I think many people also don't necessarily comprehend how we got to this point. I'm curious, with everything feeling fragile in a way that perhaps is unnerving, what do you think kind of this next 3/4 of the 21st century is going to demand of us as stewards of the world that has been built and the future that we want to create?
Yeah, I mean, a huge question, and I don't think that I think that all my work, right up until this, including the book and everything else, was trying to help people prepare for this kind of level of change. Where we're talking a lot about the fact that things were breaking down and new things are yet to be created, and we were sitting in this place called a liminal gap that we were only 1% into how dramatic the change was going to be. I mean, if anyone's heard me speak in the last 10 years, like that has been the message over and over and over again. So I'm a little less shaken by where it is that we are right now. And the book was called The Ways Visionary Leaders Play Bigger, because there's not just one single way. It's a practice. It's a way of leaning into thinking about the world differently and thinking about how we navigate it differently. Frankly, even just becoming a navigator instead of a replicator. We were taught in the business world, certainly during my tenure, right, to be super efficiency driven and productivity driven. And there's a best practices way to do it. And if you just learn the playbook, then you'd be set. And the reality is that that is not at all what it was going to look like as we move forward. And again, to better prepare, like how do you build in the capacity to be really, really curious, to listen more fully, not just as even an individual, but also as an organization. How do we build that kind of, incentive structure for curiosity, for collaboration, for not living in silos, like all these things that now we are trying to go. It's almost like, an existential COVID crisis. Again, we're like waking up going, oh my God, we got to go figure all this stuff out together. And how do we not see this coming? But again, and we're only, I hate to say it, we're not even through what the calamities could possibly be, right?
No,
this is
not even remotely.
that you're describing. We haven't even talked about what's going on with climate and the fact that that is, a threat that is marching clearer and clearer to us as I sit in the middle of another atmospheric storm here in California. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things to be paying attention to. I literally sat with a group of people and we talked about all the things that could go wrong on the planet right now. And someone asked me if that made me just feel awful. And I'm like, I feel so much better being prepared.
Yeah.
Like, I like if a solar flare happens and knocks out our entire, communications thing, like what are the options? And the fact is my friends are building a technology that allows for mesh communication that doesn't require that you have any kind of centralized server or any kind of way that you go through this. And so for me, it's like we should hasten the deployment of that. Right. And in the land in Costa Rica that I'm building with these women, like we're going to make that as part of our, infrastructure there. So it's like, I feel it's better to be prepared than not to be prepared. First, look for the solutions that could get us all on the other side of it. So I think the breakdown of education systems, great. There's all kinds of opportunities we could do that differently, right? Breakdowns in, how we coordinate things. There's so many ways we can look at the fact that this is all going to shift and change. I think at the end of the day, part of what gives me hope and that leads me then into where I think we will be is that there's just a giant also awakening that's happening at the same time, that the systems that had been built in the past that were for an industrial era, that were often designed by a very homogeneous group of white men from Europe and the US who carved up the world in a certain way and decided that this was what it was going to look like, is now failing.
Yep.
That is not shocking. And what we're seeing is a last gasp of that trying to hold on to what still is there
100%.
and not being able to make space for the thing that's going to open. So one of the things I've been talking a lot about in 2025, we wrote about it on New Year's Day, and we've been building it into more and more of our work. I'm doing a whole retreat around this in Mexico in April. Folks who want to join us for a really expansive metamorphosis retreat is this concept of the imaginal cell. So the imaginal cell was conceived or hypothesized, I think I want to say in the 16 or 1800s, sometime when microscopes became more useful. But the idea was that even in the caterpillar larva exists the cells that have the programming for becoming a butterfly, right? For the antenna.
For the metamorphosis to happen.
For metamorphosis to happen. They sit there from the very beginning, but they're very, they're small in number. They're obviously not very potent at that moment. And the really consumptive caterpillar has got to kind of get through its life cycle. And then at some point it triggers, right? I don't know exactly what the trigger point is, but it moves then into its cocoon and then to become a butterfly. And it happens because the imaginal cells increase in number and in potency. It goes from like 50 cells to 50,000 very quick. That's why I talk about exponential, right? When we are ready, like boom, like we move. And it swarms the caterpillar, and the caterpillar fights that. That's the really interesting part. There's a tremendous amount of resistance from the caterpillar to go into that because it doesn't know where it's headed into, right? It just knows it's disintegrating. And so it's going to hold on. And that's until the imaginal cells swarm it. And then obviously it starts to transition into being a pollinator butterfly. So think about going from consumptive caterpillar to pollinator butterfly. Like that's what's available to us.
It's beautiful.
Right now. Right. And every single thing I do is to increase the number and potency of imaginal cells, period. Right. As a mother, as a strategist, as a speaker, as a creator of the things that I spend time and energy actually building in the world, as a gatherer, right? The dinners that we're hosting together to pull people together into this conversation, it is to increase the potency and the number of imaginal cells. Because if we have that, which is what I see happening now, right? We start to see like in this mycelial sort of way, like these people are looking and finding and feeling more and more empowered and bold and in some ways dark and light, right? Our symbiotic system, the darker it is, the more the light feels brave to go and like
100%.
That's where we are. So
I mean, I want to come back to this imaginal cell and the butterfly's metamorphosis from caterpillar because I think it's really important. But I want to just talk a little bit. I mean, you started your career in advertising. Subsequently, you've kind of touched frozen foods, a lot of AI, reinventing the internet. You were just talking about mesh communications. I mean, I know you're big on technology, and I think that in the modern world, a lot of people look and say technology is actually the reason that we are in this crisis moment or one of the contributing factors to it. I know you're bullish, and I'm curious as you look hopefully towards the future, and help people kind of train themselves for these transition moments. What do you think the role of technology is?
I mean, I think the big invitation is exponential or universal prosperity. I mean, that's really what we're, at the cusp of, and that's what's being invited to us. So the question is, do we want to go this way or do we want to go that way? And I think there was someone who posted something on LinkedIn earlier this week that I can send you the link of after this, but it was the imaginary crisis, meaning the crisis in imagination, right? Meaning that we can only see the doom and what we're losing, and we have a very, very narrow set of stories that talk to us about what is possible on the other side. There's one slide in my talks that I sometimes put in, sometimes I don't. I talk about the future of dinner in 2025 or 20 years from now. I wrote this actually 7 or 8 years ago. So let's say it was like, whatever, 2030, 2035. But it was this really great story about two sisters. They, one lives in the city, one lives way out in the middle, what was considered exurbs. But now the technology is so good, she can still be a neuroscience assistant out there, right? But we still want connectivity. So once a week, she takes her autonomous vehicle into the town, into city to meet her sister and her family for, a dinner. But the home is set up really differently in terms that there's a 3D printer in a smaller kitchen that designs like per bespoke meals, right? So the niece would be able to put her finger in there and do a whole biometric read of what her nutritional state is. It would know if she has an exam or a lacrosse game that day. It would know if she got enough sleep or if she's stressed out, and it would print out the perfect breakfast cereal, right? Or the perfect pierogi or the perfect whatever. The technology already exists. The U.S. Army has been, testing this for almost 10 years now to be able to create nutritionally bespoke meals for each soldier, right? So now you imagine that, okay, that's how you go through your day. Instead of a garage, there's a vertical farm now in the building because we don't need our cars anymore. But the cool part was that at night at dinner, there's a communal dining area at the top of the building in which everyone gathers for dinner every single evening. The robots and the kids are making dinner together, right? You have a communal meal. And then whatever isn't consumed that evening is sent by drone around the city to whoever it was that wasn't able to join for dinner. That's my view of how technology can impact our lives.
Yeah.
Everyone remembers that story, right? Very few people remember any other stat that I put in there. Like there's a breed slide that people remember, and there's that story, right? There's a whole bunch of other tech stuff in the middle about what things are shifting and changing, but people remember that.
It's the postmodern fable.
Well, we need more of those, right? We have very, very few. I did a whole session at South by a few years ago about the role that science fiction plays on our ability to conceive, the future. Like, what are the stories that we then hold about what's possible? Yeah. And there's obviously disproportionately super dysfunctional, super,
dark.
Dark dystopian future designed as a cautionary tale. My friend who is a protopian futurist, Monica Bilskita, will talk about that it actually becomes a product roadmap for the Machiavellian as opposed to things that have really inspired us, which is like Star Trek or a little bit of Wakanda inside Black Panther, right? Again, very few. So actually one of the really interesting places I've also hope are Afrofuturism and Laura and the work that she's doing. I'm doing a work session with her this weekend on the future of time, which I'm super excited to see how to look at. Because if you look at other cultures too, and you look at this from less of a myopic, male, patriarchal, white, European. Wow, there's so many more opportunities and so many things in which we get more inputs on things. So I'm really much looking at, indigenous and other cultures. I'm looking at women. I'm looking at nature. I'm looking at youth. There are tons of hope there. That's the blueprint, right? Those are the people. And I'll just put the plug in too. At South by Southwest, I'm doing a talk on the quantum leap and the opportunity it offers us to repattern the future from a feminine perspective. Think about that for a second. Like, how cool is that?
Say it again.
The quantum leap, like meaning we're entering the quantum era, not just the AI era, but imagine a quantum era, right? And the opportunity is presenting us to repattern our future through a feminine perspective or feminine lens.
Well, so this episode, which we're recording at the end of February, will be released on the day I arrive in Austin for South by. And I know we're going to be spending some good time together there. But I think what's interesting is last year at South by Southwest, this big festival, that happens in Austin, Texas every year. There was just AI. And I was really disappointed because it was a lot of people who, I didn't find it particularly hopeful. I found it actually very much of the same, as you just said, like white male perspective of how it becomes dominant. It's not the robots collaborating with the kids and the drones taking food to the people who haven't eaten. It's actually a zero-sum game. And where we're at right now, politically, economically, et cetera, that feels a little bit more the model. And so when we talk about this feminist, and you and I have talked about this, and before, I certainly believe this, but the futurist society has these conversations, which is really about what is femininity. And it's not, of course, women. It's not only women, I should say, right? It's an idea, and perhaps an approach, right? It's one built on empathy and intuition. And I mean, maybe you can talk to that as a way of being hopeful.
100%. I mean, I can't say that more clearly enough, right? And that's why it's been really, really fun digging into this whole quantum thing. I've just laughed. This is what I've been hanging out with my quantum by my friend Worley.
And quantum computing is considered one of the emerging technologies that's really is poised to change our world alongside blockchain.
I mean, I like so much. I mean, it's like mind-blowingly cool when you start going into what's happening or starting again, not even 1%. Like we're so early in, and again, all the people that you quote in that whole book is quoted by white men from Europe and the United States, right? Except for Ada Lovelace is the only one who gets a shout out. So then you go to ChatGPT, you're like, where are all the hidden figures that also contribute to this work? And there's a whole bunch, including Einstein's first wife, by the way, who was very influential in his work and got no credit. So you start to dig into that and you start to realize, wow, there's a lot in there in which women have already contributed to this thinking. And then really the thesis is that women have a natural propensity to understand quantum mechanics, right? This idea of entanglement and this idea of being like, non-local and being able to feel connected. A cell moves here and another cell moves there. Like, what is it that makes that possible? Like, that is not like science fiction for us or like super magical or completely like out of the realm of possibility. Like, we live that, right? The quantum language is the language of living systems and the complexity of living systems. Like, that is so, so, so cool to me.
Absolutely. Because nature's already been here. I mean, exactly to your imagine a cell, right? I mean, it's been created.
Right. And it's going to live here and it's going to be here way after we're gone.
Absolutely.
Right. So if we decide to annihilate ourselves, like she's still going to be just fine.
Totally.
Why we're doing this regenerative project in Costa Rica by a waterfall and thinking about the watershed and thinking about the trees and thinking about all that and the space for, for restoration for the healers of the earth. Like these are all things that are connected. And when we're doing like something magic there, we don't think it's just for the five of us that are there, right? We're literally like that is like in the quantum space for all of us at some point. So I know it sounds woo-woo, but I mean, what's interesting to me, I've always been woo, and I've always been really interested in tech, and I've always been interested in humans, right? I was really egalitarian for the most of my life until you start realizing that there has been this campaign against women and the power of women 100%. For thousands and thousands of years, from religion through politics, for everything else. And so
which is what's being gripped onto very, very tightly right now.
But again, I go back to imagine the caterpillar who's just hanging on for dear life at this moment, who thinks that he's going to lose everything before it becomes the other thing. And 100%. So I think that what we're finding is there's more and more movement around this for people who are waking up, and men who also, like young men, are absolutely rejecting this toxic masculinity. There's some that are being certainly seduced by this idea of the power, male or whatever. But there's a lot that aren't and are saying no, thank you to this around the world because they're seeing all the systems break down and not hold them very well. So I feel like there is, and there's this giant transfer of wealth that's happening, as we know, to women. And we'll be discussing that also with the group of women at South by, which I think is super cool, which then gives us like a totally different kind of power, right? This is why women are rejecting getting married or rejecting having children to be just put into some sort of, forced indentured servitude, as opposed to having equitable relationships. And so, I think that there's a really, really, really big shift happening. Everyone talks about AI, and then they talk about climate. Very few are talking about demographic shifts that are also part of it, and the shift in consciousness that's also happening. So those four are happening simultaneously, and they're all going to be like woven together, which then changes every single industry, which changes constructs around time, money, love, aging, 100%. All of those, right? All for redesign, my love, right?
And design is
that.
It's so cool. Well, it's also, and as I like to say in the work that we do at IF, is like, design is a great act of optimism unto itself because it's creating something new. It design, whether you're designing, products or packaging or places or platforms or people or or places. Right? Yeah, it's systems, and that design of the future is really kind of a great act of hope and optimism always, no matter what it is.
And intentionality. I think the question really becomes like, Brian Collins, who's a really wonderful creative person, talked about design and the importance of design and people who are designing for yada, yada. And the point is, who gets to be a stakeholder in that? Where does nature get to be considered when we're thinking about design or, or again, equitable prosperity when we're thinking about the design of these things? So I think design is actually a really powerful tool / technology / approach that has to have more expansiveness built into it. I think it's been really, really narrow, just the same way that you could argue capitalism has been, or any of these other ways of being able to create and distribute things. And my real wish would be that we think about design much more thoughtfully.
I mean, it's the work that we're doing, which is, of course, I simultaneously hold the head of global sustainability title, and really bringing sustainability, both social and environmental considerations, into that conversation around design. And I just have to give a shout out. Brian was a guest on Future of XYZ a while ago, and he insisted, as Brian does, on speaking about the future of the future. So it's an old episode, but people can check it out. It's similar thematics. You guys see things in
I'm sure. Yeah. We have a similar background actually at Ogilvy in our early advertising days. Cool. I think that, and again, that's if you surround yourself with people who think this way, right? He's hurting too right now because he's lost a friend or two recently to suicide. So I do think that there is a reality to this too. I'm not trying to be optimistic without appreciating that there's pain that people are feeling right now, right? And dislocation that people are feeling. I sobbed during the inauguration moment because I just thought it's just going to usher in more and more pain.
Yes.
Right. I'm all about change
in a short time,
whatever. But the people who are not prepared for this, the people who are going to be disproportionately called out on this, right? That is real. And so again, as much as I can talk about imaginary selves, right? The drive of that is I'm trying to reduce suffering on the planet for any and all.
Well, and it's interesting because you work at Play Big and everything that you're doing, as you said, you're trying to usher in hope and give hope. But like, if we think about, kind of the systems that were created starting, let's say, in 1800 and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, I think that's really the moment in time. Some say the Anthropocene is not a real thing, but of course, like we some of us do believe that, man has fundamentally shifted, kind of nature in this geologic age. But the point is, of course, that it's shifting and changing. And the work that you do is really trying to help coach, if you will, and bring visionary leaders to kind of adopt this new mindset that it is transformative and embraces what's the possible, not denying that there is pain and suffering, but trying to, of course, like become more, let's just call it regenerative, right? Like give back, give in, rebuild.
Use the platforms that we have and the resources that we have to be able to create, again, shared prosperity and inclusion for everyone. So this idea of going from, in the business world, we talk about moving from CSR, right? Which is a very extractive model and you transfer a little bit over here, as opposed to having a social license to operate and really thinking about every single decision that you make across a range of stakeholders, right? That is a simple quote unquote mindset change, but it means that fiduciarily, you got to make sure that you're all lined up with that. And you've got a board and you've got investors and you've got people who do that. And again, just back on the technology thing, I am so pro technology because it's not the technology, it is how it is commercialized, right? It is how it is incentivized. The big frustration around South by last year was that it was like, jobs are never going to disappear. It's only going to augment you and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think that's a big fat lie. And that we should be thinking about economic models right now that take into consideration that as many as a third of the people in the world right now might be displaced from the work that they have and not know what the rest of not be skilled enough or have not a job that would be replaced. That's okay in my book, as long as you have an economic system that prepares for that.
And takes care of it so that, right?
Care of it. I mean, thinking about it, like, does it mean, again, we will have high productivity. We'll be able to 3D print a house for a fraction of the cost. We'll be able to create food in all kinds of interesting ways. Like we will be able to have the needs met for a lower cost or greater productivity, but how do you match that better? And the economic models that we have from the industrial era will not hold here, and certainly not if you're building an advertising revenue model on top of a really powerful technology. I'm a strategist at heart. And so the question is, how do we strategically think about this differently? I come from an economics and psychology background. Like these are things that are really important to me that we think about that. So I'm going to head to Silicon Valley in 2 weeks to talk with a really wonderful woman there who just wrote a book called Employment is Dead. About how do we say, like, yes, on the one hand, work is going to change, but then how do we build the economic understanding what that means around
Which is really like the work of the future, kind of going beyond current economic models. Yeah.
100%. I make a distinction between the future of working, the future of work, and the work of the future. Those are three completely distinct things, and we don't up into one. We can go into that whole conversation about what that means. But the work of the future is to really think about how we build the systems, right? How we design things in a more thoughtfully, more inclusively, more sustainably, so that we can usher in this world that I think is entirely possible. And again, we're going to fight against the people who are going to think they're losing in that, the people who control all that. I've also said, literally from the stage, he who controls the algorithm will control all the wealth.
Yes.
It is so clear, right? And unless we change some of this distribution of stuff, this is going to continue to happen. You'll have a single person who's a trillionaire, right?
Yep.
if you think you're a megalomaniac when you hit like a few, billion, imagine, what happens when you become a trillionaire. Like you literally lose complete grip of your place in the world.
Completely.
And it wasn't because you're so genius. It's because you had a way of being able to have this technology and you had a whole bunch of economic systems that allowed you to hold and capture all the value for that.
Absolutely. And you chose to continue capturing it for your own selfish use
because
rather than giving it back.
Because you figured out a system that is disproportionately like stacked in your favor.
And also there seems to be, coming back to the CSR and we're coming to time, but the CSR being corporate social responsibility within corporations is kind of this model, became ESG, although they're not equal. But this philanthropic, if you will, considering other stakeholders besides shareholders, thinking about employees, thinking about the planet, thinking about, kind of communities, et cetera, is really where we've transitioned to, except that in this model of becoming billionaires and trillionaires, the technocrats, there seems not to be any consideration for anyone except selfish gain, which is, of course, at the end of the economic model as we have it, if we are to believe that, the planet can't go on like that, because what's going to happen to everything else? It's not. It's not
short-term thinking. It's unsafe.
Exactly.
None of those people are futurists.
No,
they might think of themselves as like tech, visionaries. But tech visionary and an actual social futurist are very different things.
100%. And they're not feminists. That's the other thing.
Absolutely not. Again, or feminine in the sense that we're really not feminist because we need more masculine energy, right? According to one of our tech bros, but certainly from a feminine perspective, right? How do we think again about the whole? How do we think about the collective? Like it's been really interesting in the finance world, right? 98% of every dollar right now that is given by VCs goes to a male founded company.
Yes.
A small portion of that is female co-founders, but the majority of them, like 92%, is only male only, right? You look at microfinance, it's the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Right? Microfinance,
and also people of color. It's even worse.
But if you look at microfinance, 98% of it goes to women. Why? Because they take care of the community, right? They both build a cow, or they invest in a cow that everybody can actually drink from. They figure out how to do this across the whole. So we've got to figure out how to balance that thing out more. Where the people who have an orientation toward collaboration and connection and community are given the resources to be able to go build that. But again, we have an economic model that disincentivizes this and over-incentivizes that. And that's part of what we need to shift. There's a film that we're raising money for right now, Humanity versus Capitalism. Mm-hmm. Everyone asks me why versus, and I'm like, well, partly to be provocative, right? The hope is that it's not. But right now we've got capitalism doesn't take into consideration extraction from nature or any unpaid care work or creativity that goes unpaid. Those are really the key drivers of everything that happens in economics. But if they're not in any of the calculations, you think you're playing a capitalist game and you're not. Rianne Eisler will say capitalism is a really great thing. We should try it sometime.
I love that. As we think about wrapping up here, we're going to come back to the imagined selves of the butterfly, because I think, I usually ask for iconic references, but I think your book is one, and I think actually this movie is others. Is there anything else? Wonder, think, do, repeat. Exactly. Curiosity, gratitude, action, and do it again, right? And collaboration.
Yeah, this is literally stenciled on the wall of my home. Mm-hmm. This has been the blueprint for my children as they grew up. They wrote college essays about what this meant for them. But it comes down as simple as this.
I love that. Right now, for anyone listening to the podcast, Nancy is holding up her coffee mug, and it's stenciled with wonder, thank, do, repeat.
Yeah. And that is it to me. Honestly, if you just lived in that every single day, and that's what we, incentivized, inculcated, and really held as the way we want to raise our children, I think we'd all be feeling a lot better about this moment that we're in. We feel more prepared, certainly for the moment that we're in right now.
So as an activist for a better next, as I've heard you called before, my last question to guests always is the same. And I ask, what is your greatest hope for the future of X topic? In this case is, what's your greatest hope or wish for the future of hope, imagine in 2050 and 25 years from now?
Well, I think that, that will help. I can't even speak. We will have transitioned away from the sense of fear and scarcity, and we will have entered into that cocoon of the imaginal cell, right? That turns into the butterfly. Hopefully we'll already have gotten to what it feels like to be on the other side of this. But I think that for most of it is just to not resist the fact that things are shifting and changing. And we're moving into an era that allows for, again, extraordinary possibility. All these constructs that we have been taught or the way that it's supposed to be are now up for redesign. And that's a really good thing. I want people to be excited, but what does it look like to redesign? Again, even how we hold time. how we think about our relationships with one another. Certainly now we think about education and work and money and building and distribution of everything. Like all of that seems daunting for some, but I think that hopefully we will have built the capacity over the next, however many years to look at that as a really, really exciting moment as opposed to a scary one. That's my and again, everything that I am doing on the planet right now is to try and usher it as fast as possible. So thank you for the opportunity to even do this conversation with you, because I think that your work is part of that, Lisa, right? It's about giving people a chance to look at what is possible.
Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate it, and I love having you on. I mean, we've experienced it before personally, where we get to geek out on all of these really important and awesome topics. But I love the way your brain works, and I love that you shared this message of hope and optimism and change, and embracing change for the betterment of everyone, not just a few, everywhere you go. So thank you for that.
Of course, this is how we do it together.
Indeed. And I think that togetherness, everyone watching and listening to Future of XYZ, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow. You can check out Nancy across social media. Her work's amazing. If you're at South by this year and you're listening to this, check out Nancy Giordano in the official schedule, or myself, Lisa Grelnick. We're giving 2 talks. And we really look forward to a hopeful future. I know that's a large part of what Future of XYZ likes to explore. So thanks again, Nancy, for joining us.
Of course. Thank you, darling.